What are you looking at?
Nothing.
The steel doors clanged shut with a finality that echoed through Marcus Thompson's soul. At 28, the decorated Army sergeant had survived 3 tours in Afghanistan, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Wrongfully convicted of a crime he didn't commit, he now faced the concrete jungle of Riverside Penitentiary. As he walked through the yard for the first time, predatory eyes followed his every move. Tank Morrison, the prison's self-appointed king, cracked his knuckles and smiled a gold-toothed grin. He saw fresh meat, a quiet black man who kept his head down and his mouth shut. Tank had no idea he was about to challenge a warrior who had learned to fight not just with his fists, but with honor, strategy, and an unbreakable spirit forged in the crucible of war. Marcus sat alone in the corner of the cafeteria, methodically eating his meal while scanning the room with eyes trained to spot danger. The other inmates gave him a wide berth, unsure what to make of the newcomer who carried himself with military precision. His posture was straight, his movements deliberate, his silence commanding respect even among hardened criminals. Tank Morrison watched from across the room, his massive frame towering over his crew of followers. The prison bully had built his reputation on breaking men who thought they were tough, and this new fish looked like the perfect candidate. "Look at that boy over there," Tank growled to his lieutenant, Razor, a wiry man with scars crisscrossing his face. "Thinks he's better than us with that straight back and fancy manners." The other inmates at Tank's table laughed, but there was nervous energy in their voices. Something about the new prisoner made them uneasy, though they couldn't put their finger on what. Marcus continued eating, aware of every conversation, every movement, every potential threat around him. He had learned in combat that the loudest enemy was often the least dangerous. Tank rose from his table, his chair scraping against the concrete floor with deliberate slowness. The cafeteria fell silent as conversations died and all eyes turned to watch the inevitable confrontation. Marcus didn't look up from his tray, but his grip on his plastic spoon shifted slightly, his body language changing in ways only a trained observer would notice. Years of military discipline had taught him to remain calm under pressure, to assess threats without showing fear. The silence stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. "You deaf, boy?" Tank's voice boomed across the space between them. "When the king of this castle walks your way, you show respect." Marcus slowly lifted his eyes, meeting Tank's gaze with a steady stare that revealed nothing of his thoughts or intentions. The two men locked eyes for a long moment, and something in Marcus's calm confidence made Tank's bravado falter for just an instant. It was a look Tank had never seen before. Not fear, not defiance, but something far more dangerous, absolute certainty. The guards watched from their elevated positions, hands resting on their batons, ready to intervene if necessary. They had seen this dance before, the established alpha asserting dominance over fresh meat. But something felt different this time, electric and unpredictable. Marcus slowly placed his spoon down and folded his hands on the table, his movements so controlled they seemed almost choreographed. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried across the silent cafeteria with crystal clarity. "I'm just here to do my time peacefully." The next morning, Marcus was mopping floors in the laundry room when Tank and 3 of his crew cornered him. The space was isolated from the main corridors, chosen specifically for its lack of surveillance cameras and guard presence. Steam from the industrial washers created a suffocating atmosphere, and the constant noise would mask any sounds of violence. Tank cracked his knuckles as his men blocked the exits, their faces twisted with anticipation. They had done this countless times before, breaking new inmates to establish the prison hierarchy. "Time for your orientation, soldier boy," Tank sneered, emphasizing the last words with mock respect. "Around here, I'm the only general you need to worry about." Marcus continued mopping, his movements steady and unhurried, as if he hadn't heard the threat. The casual dismissal infuriated Tank, who grabbed the mop handle and yanked it away. Marcus let it go without resistance, stepping back with his hands raised peacefully. To the bullies, it looked like submission, but Marcus was creating distance and assessing his tactical situation. Tank shoved Marcus hard against the concrete wall, expecting to see fear in his eyes. Instead, he found himself looking into the calm gaze of a man who had stared down enemy combatants in life-or-death situations. "You think you're tough because you played soldier?" Tank growled, his breath hot against Marcus's face. "This ain't Afghanistan, boy. This is my world." Marcus remained perfectly still, his breathing controlled, his muscles relaxed but ready. He had learned in combat that the moment before violence erupted was often the most crucial. Without warning, Tank threw a haymaker punch aimed at Marcus's jaw. In one fluid motion that seemed to defy physics, Marcus ducked under the blow, grabbed Tank's extended arm, and used the bully's own momentum to slam him face first into the wall. The move was over in seconds, executed with the precision of someone who had trained thousands of hours in hand-to-hand combat. Tank's followers froze in shock, unable to process how their seemingly invincible leader had been neutralized so quickly and efficiently. Marcus stepped back, assuming a relaxed but ready stance, his eyes scanning all three remaining opponents. "Like I said," he repeated calmly, "I'm just here to do my time peacefully." Tank pushed himself off the wall, blood trickling from his nose, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. The prison's established order had just been shattered by a quiet man who moved like water and struck like lightning. The word would spread through the cell blocks within hours. There was a new force to be reckoned with in Riverside Penitentiary. Word of Tank's humiliation spread through the prison like wildfire, carried by whispered conversations and knowing looks. Inmates who had lived in fear of the bully for years walked a little taller, while Tank's crew began to question their leader's invincibility. Marcus continued his daily routine unchanged, working his assignments, eating his meals, reading in his cell. But now, other prisoners watched him with a mixture of curiosity and newfound respect. They began to notice details they had missed before. The way he carried himself, the alertness in his eyes, the controlled precision of his movements. Carlos Ruiz, a lifer who had earned respect through intelligence rather than violence, approached Marcus during yard time. At 52, Carlos had seen enough prison politics to recognize when the balance of power was shifting. "You military?" he asked directly, settling beside Marcus on the weight bench. Marcus nodded once, continuing his measured repetitions without breaking rhythm. Carlos smiled knowingly. "Thought so." Tank picked the wrong man to test. The conversation was brief, but significant. Carlos was offering alliance, and his backing carried weight in the prison's complex social structure. That evening, Tank appeared at Marcus's cell door with two new recruits, young men desperate to prove themselves in the prison hierarchy. His face still showed bruises from their encounter, but his eyes burned with the need for revenge. "You got lucky in the laundry," Tank snarled through the bars. "But luck runs out." Marcus looked up from the book he was reading, a military history tome, and met Tank's gaze calmly. "It wasn't luck," he said simply, returning to his reading. The quiet confidence in his voice made the young recruits shift uncomfortably. The next day brought a coordinated attack during the chaos of meal service. Tank and four men surrounded Marcus's table, but this time other inmates didn't scatter. Carlos and his people remained seated, a silent show of support that didn't go unnoticed. An older black veteran named Jerome Washington stood up slowly, his graying hair and weathered face commanding immediate attention. "Tank," he said in a voice that carried the authority of decades behind bars, "you might want to think twice about this path." The intervention was unexpected, and Tank found himself facing not just Marcus, but a growing coalition of respect. Marcus stood slowly, his movements deliberate and non-threatening, but his readiness was unmistakable. "I told you before, I'm here to do my time peacefully," he said, his voice carrying to every table in the cafeteria. But peaceful doesn't mean powerless. The distinction was clear to everyone present. Marcus was offering Tank a way out, a chance to back down with some dignity intact. The choice would define not just their relationship, but the entire dynamic of power within the prison walls. The silence stretched taut as every inmate waited to see which direction the tide would turn. Tank's desperation grew as his influence waned and inmates began openly defying his authority. In a last, reckless attempt to reclaim his position, he orchestrated what he believed would be the ultimate humiliation, cornering Marcus in the showers where privacy would allow for maximum brutality. 6 men entered the shower area after Marcus, confident that numbers would overwhelm any amount of skill. The sound of running water would mask the violence they planned to inflict. Tank's face was twisted with the fury of a man watching his kingdom crumble. But Marcus had been expecting this escalation. His combat experience had taught him to anticipate enemy tactics and prepare accordingly. As the attackers spread out to surround him, Marcus's training kicked in automatically. The confined space that Tank thought would be advantageous actually worked in Marcus's favor. It limited their ability to attack simultaneously and gave him clear sight lines to all threats. Steam from the hot water created an almost surreal atmosphere as the confrontation began. The fight was swift and decisive. Marcus moved through his opponents like a ghost, using their size against them in the slippery environment. Years of military training had prepared him for exactly this kind of situation: multiple attackers, limited space, life-or-death stakes. He disabled each man efficiently and without unnecessary violence, demonstrating a level of skill that left no doubt about his capabilities. When the dust settled, Tank lay unconscious on the shower floor, while his remaining men nursed broken bones and wounded pride. Jerome Washington arrived with several guards, having anticipated the confrontation and alerted the authorities. As Marcus was led away for questioning, the old veteran caught his eye and nodded with deep respect. "Your service to this country didn't end when you took off that uniform, son," he said quietly. The guards, reviewing security footage later, were amazed by what they saw: a textbook demonstration of defensive combat by someone who clearly had extensive military training. The official report would note that Marcus had acted purely in self-defense against multiple attackers. That night, the entire cell block was quiet as news of the shower incident spread. Tank was in the infirmary, his reign of terror effectively ended by a man who had never sought confrontation but would not back down from it. Marcus sat in his cell, writing a letter to his sister on the outside, describing not the violence but the small kindnesses he was beginning to see in unlikely places. He had found something unexpected in prison, a community of men who, despite their mistakes, still recognized honor when they saw it. The transformation was beginning not just in Marcus, but in the institution itself. Within weeks, Marcus had become an unofficial leader among the inmates, not through intimidation, but through quiet strength and unwavering principle. Men began approaching him with problems, seeking guidance from someone who had proven himself under fire. He started teaching basic self-defense to inmates who had been victimized by predators, sharing military discipline techniques that helped men find structure in their chaotic lives. The prison social dynamics were shifting as Marcus's influence grew, replacing a culture of fear with one of mutual respect. Captain Rodriguez, the head of prison security, called Marcus into his office for an unprecedented meeting. "I've been running this place for 15 years, the captain said, reviewing Marcus's file. "I've never seen one man change the atmosphere like this." The official records showed a dramatic decrease in violent incidents, improved cooperation among inmates, and a general stabilization that had administrators talking. Rodriguez revealed something that shocked Marcus. They had discovered evidence that could overturn his conviction, but the legal process would take time. Marcus used this knowledge not for personal hope, but to inspire others to use their time constructively. He organized educational programs, helping inmates earn their GEDs and develop job skills for reentry. Jerome Washington, the old veteran, became his closest ally, sharing stories of his own military service in Vietnam and the mistakes that had led him to prison. Together, they created a brotherhood that transcended racial lines, built on shared values of honor, respect, and second chances. The transformation reached beyond the prison walls when Marcus's story caught the attention of veterans' rights organizations and criminal justice reform advocates. Lawyers began investigating similar cases of wrongful conviction, using Marcus's situation as a catalyst for broader change. His sister, Sarah, started a social media campaign that brought national attention to the failures in his case. The quiet soldier who had entered prison seeking only to serve his time peacefully had become the unwitting center of a movement for justice. Tank, now relegated to protective custody after repeated attempts on his life by inmates he had formerly terrorized, watched from isolation as the prison transformed. His empire of fear had been replaced by something he couldn't understand, a community built on mutual respect rather than dominance. Through his cell window, he could see inmates gathering peacefully in the yard, listening as Marcus shared stories of military service and the values that had sustained him through combat. The man who had once ruled through violence was witnessing the power of principled leadership. 18 months later, Marcus walked out of Riverside Penitentiary a free man, his conviction overturned by evidence that had finally come to light. But he didn't leave alone. He carried with him the respect of hundreds of men whose lives he had touched. The prison had been transformed into a model facility, with recidivism rates dropping dramatically as inmates embraced the principles Marcus had taught them. Captain Rodriguez personally escorted him to the gates, shaking hands with genuine admiration for what had been accomplished. Sarah waited outside with tears streaming down her face, holding a folded American flag that had draped their father's coffin. "You kept Dad's honor alive in there," she whispered as they embraced. Behind them, local news crews documented the release of a man who had become a symbol of resilience and redemption. Veterans organizations had prepared job opportunities, and law schools were inviting him to speak about criminal justice reform. The quiet soldier had found his voice and platform for change. Inside the prison, the men Marcus left behind continued the programs he had established. Jerome Washington had been appointed as an official mentor coordinator, using his decades of experience to guide newcomers toward positive paths. Tank, still in protective custody, had requested to meet with a counselor for the first time in his prison career. The fear-based hierarchy he had created was being replaced by a system of earned respect and mutual support. Marcus's first stop as a free man was the military cemetery where his father was buried. He knelt beside the headstone, placing his hand on the worn marble as he shared the story of his ordeal and triumph. "I never forgot what you taught me about honor, Dad," he whispered. "Even in the darkest place, it's possible to be a light." The wind rustled through the flags marking other veterans' graves, as if the entire brotherhood of warriors was acknowledging his service in circumstances none of them could have imagined. At the press conference that evening, Marcus stood before cameras and reporters, his military bearing intact despite everything he had endured. When asked what he would do next, his answer was simple but profound. "I'm going to continue serving. The uniform may be different, but the mission remains the same. Protecting those who cannot protect themselves and proving that honor isn't determined by where you are, but by who you choose to be." The soldier had come home, not broken by injustice, but strengthened by the knowledge that true victory comes from lifting others up rather than tearing them down. If this story reminded you that strength comes not from dominance, but from dignity, that leadership is service, and that honor can flourish even in the darkest places, perhaps it's the sign you needed today. If it is, subscribe.